This is encouraging. The challenge to finances remains significant. The Asia-Pacific region, where over 40% of the economic activities depend on nature services, has an annual financing gap of 800 billion if they are to meet the Paris Agreement. Bridging this gap is crucial to building climate-resilient economies, sustainable supply chains, and long-term sustainability. Hong Kong as a leading sustainable finance hub and a connector with mainland China and Asia, has a key role to play together with global initiatives such as TNFD in unlocking the flow of capital. We have with us today leading pioneers in this field to share their insights, initiatives, and experience. HKGFA and BAEC, as co-conveners of TNFD Hong Kong, can support the market adoption for corporates and harness the financing needed. So with that, let me pass the floor to Simon Ng, CEO of BEC, to provide his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to today's webinar that marks the launch of the TNFD LEAP approach in Hong Kong. I'm pleased and excited to see so many of you joining us online and from different parts of the world. And BEC is delighted to be co-hosting this landmark event in collaboration with the Hong Kong Green Finance Association. In January this year, BEC and HKGFA announced our partnership as co-conveners of the TNFD consultation group in Hong Kong. At the same time, another TNFD consultation group in mainland China was set up with the Institute of Finance and Sustainability as its convener. The establishment of both groups, along with the TNFD release of its LEAP approach document in Mandarin, highlights the traction building in this side of the world and in the Chinese market for nature-related considerations to be integrated into business and financial decision-making. BEC identified nature as a rapidly evolving space, gaining momentum across Hong Kong's corporate landscape, and has played an active role in policy advocacy and stakeholder engagement. Many of you joining today's event from Hong Kong will know, but for those who don't, the Hong Kong government is updating our city-level biodiversity strategy and action plan, or BSAP in short, with expectations for completion and release within this year. BEC represented the business community on the steering committee of the Hong Kong Biodiversity Expert Group, which was a parallel process coordinated by experts in the conservation community to provide recommendations to the government for its consultation and consideration in the BSAP. In that process, BEC led the Business for Biodiversity Focus Group comprising over 20 corporates from business and finance, expert academics, conservation ecologists, and consultants. Some key areas identified as challenges slowing business action on biodiversity included a lack of clear top-down signaling to strengthen the business and finance case for biodiversity, a lack of capacity, hence the need to build it out, and a lack of collaboration between the main stakeholders in the space. As such, BEC will continue our work in this space and plans to establish a multi-stakeholder task force to address these topics and support corporate action on nature in Hong Kong. Through this, we will facilitate collaboration between businesses, financiers, and other stakeholders to support the value of nature and its values in driving sustainable development and supply chains in this region, continue building the business case for investing in nature, and support responsible investment and financing for nature. I also want to say a few words about disclosure and reporting, which are clearly emphasized as crucial drivers of business action in Hong Kong and beyond. To date, 11 companies in Hong Kong have committed to make TNFD-aligned disclosures, indicating a growing interest from corporates to assess, measure, and disclose their nature-related risks, dependencies, impacts, and opportunities. Adopting the TNFD framework will support Hong Kong's businesses in better integrating biodiversity considerations into decision-making processes, improving transparency and accountability, and ultimately fostering more sustainable practices across industry and driving nature-based financing. Thank you once again for joining us today. Under the TNFD Consultation Group, this webinar is the first activity facilitated by the Hong Kong co-conveners. Please stay tuned as we have more coming up in the pipeline. And I look forward to the insights that we will share today from our TNFD experts and TNFD adoptee company representatives on the framework and its implementation in Hong Kong. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Tony Goldner, CEO of TNFD, to deliver his keynote speech. Tony, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Simon, and wonderful to be with everyone today. And first of all, let me thank you, Simon and Jenny, and both of your teams at Hong Kong Green Finance Association and BEC for acting as our consultation group conveners in Hong Kong. We're really thrilled to have your support and your guidance. And I'd also like to thank both of our task force members from Bank of China and Swire Properties. Patrick has been with us since the beginning of the journey, and we've been very blessed to have Bank of China join the task force just in the last couple of months. And so we've got a very strong Chinese voice on the task force now, which is terrific, and particular perspectives from the unique built environment context of Hong Kong as well. So what I wanted to do today is just sort of set the context for why we think this is so important and why we're so excited by the launch of the Mandarin guidance, LEAP guidance today. I think it really starts with the why. Why is nature now such an important issue? We all woke up this morning to news of tariffs. There's been a lot of focus on climate change, and of course there are many other issues facing business and finance, supply chain disruptions, cybersecurity. There are a lot of issues for business and financial institutions to be making sense of in the world today. And so why do we need to get nature right there at the center of corporate strategy and corporate thinking? And the answer is because the resilience of every organization depends to some degree, and in many cases in a large degree, on the dependencies that they have on nature. And so the resilience of business depends on the resilience of nature. If we don't take care of nature, if we don't halt and reverse nature loss, it's going to not only be bad for the planet, bad for society in terms of lifestyle, income, livelihoods, health. So many impacts will be created for our societies. But it's also going to compromise the long-term financial viability of every business and every financial institution, whether it's a bank or an insurer or an asset owner or an asset manager. And so we need to be thinking about nature now as a strategic management issue, both in terms of risk and opportunity, not as a corporate social responsibility issue, and not as a compliance issue. And at TNFD, we still see a lot of people coming to this discussion and thinking of TNFD as yet another compliance burden. But I really wanted to emphasize today in our discussion that we have to be elevating our relationship with nature as a strategic issue, as both a risk issue, but also as a value driver for the future of every business and every financial institution. And that's why it's really important that every company be assessing how nature is relevant to its business and how its business is impacting on the planet. And that's precisely what our LEAP guidance is designed to help people do. When TNFD was started in 2021, of course, people made the association with TCFD, and that was about corporate reporting and disclosure. And of course, we have put out a set of reporting and disclosure recommendations, building on top of TCFD. But it was also very clear that because nature is such a new topic to most people in business and finance as a business issue, there was also a very strong request not to just provide a set of disclosure recommendations, but also to provide guidance on how do we make sense of nature as an issue relevant for our business. And that is why and how LEAP was born. LEAP is an assessment tool, and as Emily's going to take you through in a few minutes, it's designed to help you from very limited knowledge around how nature might be relevant to our business, all the way through to an assessment of potential risks and opportunities to your organization, and ultimately then helping to inform what you may need to disclose because of your fiduciary duty to your shareholders, to regulators and other stakeholders. And so it's a sort of stepwise approach, an integrated approach to helping every business and every financial institution make sense of its relationship with nature. And that's important not just for the companies who have formal disclosure requirements, perhaps they're listed on the stock exchange or they're subject to regulatory oversight. We need to encourage every business, from a family-owned farming operation to a distribution company, to large multinationals, to be assessing their nature-related issues. And that's why we're particularly excited about the Mandarin translation of the LEAP guidance now being a widely available tool to help get businesses across China to make sense of the potential nature-related issues. When we first developed LEAP, we did this in a method like software development. We developed several iterations. We published it as a draft or a beta release, and we encouraged people to support the development of the LEAP guidance. And I was particularly thrilled. I still remember the moment when one of the first attempts at doing that I saw was from Town Gas, actually in Hong Kong. And so in many respects, Hong Kong has been at the forefront of helping us develop LEAP, because we had organizations like Town Gas amongst the very first to attempt to do a LEAP assessment. And I remember opening up their assessment and looking at the graphs and the charts and the numbers, thinking, wow, this is really, really helping to drive business useful insights. So my hope is, coming out of today's session, that this is inspiration for companies across China to be thinking about nature in a new way, to be thinking about nature as a strategic issue, and to start digging in and asking the basic questions. How are we dependent on nature? What are those dependencies? Where are they in our business? And what do we have to be doing to better manage our dependencies and impacts on nature? Because if you can answer those questions, you can then inform potential risks and opportunities to your own business processes and to your long-term financial health. And Emily's going to take us through a little bit more of the detail shortly. Let me just build on Simon's comments about reporting. So many of you will have disclosure requirements, and of course TNFD now does provide a very clear set of recommendations that are both aligned to TCFD, but also now aligned to the new IFRS sustainability standards developed by the ISSB. And our work with ISSB continues as they look at nature issues beyond climate. But our guidance and our recommendations already builds on top of their language used in their ISSB S1 and S2 standards. So for those of you with reporting requirements, I would encourage you to think about adopting the TNFD on a voluntary basis as a glide path into potential future regulatory requirements. But also in order to be on the front foot and responding to information needs of your investors. What we're hearing around the world is that investors are increasingly coming and asking questions of the companies they are providing capital to about how nature is relevant to their business, and they want to see evidence that the company understands those particular issues. So doing a LEAP assessment and starting to make disclosures on a voluntary basis puts you on the front foot. It shows that you're on top of these issues and able to respond to those information requirements, not just from regulators because you have to, but because investors are also asking information. And we're starting to see nature risk being priced into financial risk. And so, of course, companies that are embracing this early are potentially protecting themselves from higher cost of capital or disruptions to their access to capital, and possibly even creating a position of advantage. Just a final comment on capacity building. So we're really delighted, as I said, to be working with Business Environment Centre and Hong Kong Green Finance Association, because there's still a lot of work to do in terms of capacity building around the world. And we have now a network of consultation groups like we do in Hong Kong in 20 jurisdictions around the world. And we're focused on two particular issues at the moment. The first is on training and capacity building so that companies and financial institutions can build their knowledge and their confidence to take action. We've recently released a lot of training material on the TNFD website, which people can access directly. But also we've provided white label training material for training companies so that they can put this into their corporate training programs, certified professional development programs, and other things. So I'd encourage those of you who are at the beginning of your journey and looking to learn more about how nature is relevant to your business, not only to have a look at the LEAP guidance, but also if you feel like you need to break this into parts and go step by step and have access to training materials, we now have a fantastic set of resources on our website, including documents and videos, webinars that people can watch. The second big capacity issue that we're working on is access to better data. And we're particularly focused on access for market participants to decision useful nature related information, both about the state of nature, so where are we operating and what is the state of nature in that area, but also eventually to data coming through their supply chains, because of course big companies at the end of the supply chain are going to need to gather information from across their supply chain partners going forward. And so TNFD is working on a series of data initiatives this year, and we've been working with partners in China and other jurisdictions around the world to assess the current quality and state of nature data, and what can we do and how can we improve the quality and accessibility of nature data to business and finance. So be happy to take any questions or comments around that during the session later today, but perhaps I'll just stop there and hand back to you, I think, Jenny, and look forward very much to the discussion this morning, or this afternoon your time. Thank you very much.
Great. No, thank you so much for setting the scene, Tony, and also the great work that TNFD has done so far. I'd like to now pass the floor to Emily Mackenzie, the Technical Director for TNFD, and she will take us through the framework and then also the LEAP approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually today for the launch of the Mandarin version of the TNFD LEAP guidance in Hong Kong. And it was my pleasure to visit Hong Kong twice in recent years and to meet you, Simon and Jenny and others in the region for the launch of the recommendations back in April last year, and now for the launch of the LEAP approach. I'll give a short introduction to TNFD and the LEAP approach before we move to the panel discussion and see how it's all being brought to life. So we can move forward. Thank you. So as Tony emphasised, nature is now increasingly being recognised as a strategic and central risk management issue in its own right and for addressing climate change. But in the past, both businesses, corporates and financial institutions have not had the tools to enable them to identify and assess and manage and disclose these issues. And so TNFD was established to fill this gap and to provide these much needed tools. It was launched in 2021. It's a global initiative led by the market. You can see here on this slide the list of task force members who form the central design team. We're science-based, so we're supported by leading science and standards bodies in our work, and supported by governments, both the G7 and the G20. And so over a 2-year period from when it was launched in 2021 to September 2023, the TNFD developed a package of disclosure recommendations and technical guidance to enable organisations to do their assessments, do their reporting and take action. And it's been a delight to have Swire Properties as one of our task force members, and more recently to welcome the Bank of China. Let me show briefly some of the important concepts at the centre of the TNFD guidance for understanding what nature is and how it benefits people. So it covers nature, which is the natural world, all 4 of the realms, so land, ocean, freshwater and atmosphere, without going into detail on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, which are of course covered by the TCFD and now the ISSB's S2 climate disclosure standard internationally. And these realms provide that entry point for understanding nature. Once we understand nature as a stock of capital that's providing us with benefits on which all economic activity depends, we then look at 4 critical concepts for how businesses interact with nature, their dependencies and impacts on nature, and then the risks and opportunities that creates for organisations, as Tony emphasised. So these might be dependencies on things like water provision, water quality regulation, habitat for pollinators and so on, and then might have impacts which could be both positive or negative on the quality and quantity of nature, which of course could then feed back to those dependencies that they have. So what TNFD's created, if we go to the next slide, is an integrated architecture, a set of tools and guidance for action. And there are 3 main areas illustrated here. So internal assessment, that's the focus of today, because the LEAP approach is the central guidance for identifying and assessing these issues internally within an organisation. Then, of course, external reporting, which is where the TNFD's disclosure recommendations come in, as well as work on metrics and data. So we have a set of indicators and metrics covering different topics and different sectors, both for the assessment and for the external reporting. Go to the next slide. So for external reporting, which isn't our focus today, but I'll just briefly mention that TNFD launched this set of disclosure recommendations that build on the same language, structure, and the 11 recommendations specifically of the TCFD, now in the ISSB's S2 standard. And that's to encourage and support integrated climate and nature reporting over time, but also to build from those who already are underway with climate. So we replicate the same 4 disclosure pillars of governance, strategy, risk and impact management, and metrics and targets. Those are the 4 pillars, and only added 3 new additional recommendations to the TCFD's original 11, where there was a clear rationale that was needed to do so for nature. So our focus today is on the TNFD's guidance for internal identification and assessment of nature-related issues. It's called the LEAP approach. And when we first started 3 years ago, market participants gave us very strong feedback that practical guidance on how to do this would be very welcome complement to the disclosure recommendations, because it was a new topic and perceived as quite complicated and hard to begin. That's why we developed the LEAP approach. It's called LEAP because it's structured around 4 phases of assessment: locating your interface with nature across different geographies, sectors, and value chains; evaluating how you depend and impact on nature; assessing the risks and opportunities to your organization; and then preparing to respond and report on the material issues you've identified aligned with our disclosure recommendations. So 4 phases, each has 4 components, very logically ordered with a set of guiding questions, links to tools and data sources. And this builds on much of what already existed. So we're building on the shoulders of many other giants, from the Natural Capital Protocol to the SBTN, target setting methods, and so on. So a few things to note. This is suggested guidance. LEAP is a suggested guidance. It's not required to make TNFD disclosures. But it does can support those disclosures. And so this diagram shows how in detail each of the 4 phases and components of LEAP. And also at the bottom, you can see which of the 14 recommended disclosures are supported by each of the 4 phases of LEAP. So this is a logical structure as you think through how it could inform reporting. We go to the next slide, and I'm sure you'll want to go through all of this in much more detail in the new translation. I've only got time to give you a very high-level overview, but each of the 4 phases of LEAP, I'll just give a little taster. So on the locate phase, to gain this objective is to gain a solid understanding of where you might have moderate or high dependencies and impacts, filtered by sector, by value chain, or by geography. And that then enables you to do more detailed due diligence in the evaluate and assess phases. So this gives you useful outputs like a list of potentially material activities, or for financial institutions, a heat map of potentially material sectors, and a map of the assessment locations where these issues might arise. Go to the next slide. Very briefly, just wanted to show how this is coming to life in specific examples. So heat mapping is one technique you can use to do this, to identify potential or actual exposure to nature risk by identifying where there might be sectors where there are high dependencies and impact. So you can use these heat maps to do this. It's particularly relevant in L2, and we have a whole Annex 4 in the LEAP approach, which goes through guidance on heat mapping. And you can see here an example from, sorry, if we could just go back for 1 second, an example from Norges Bank Investment Management, who've looked at this, and they're the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. And this illustrates the equities portfolio exposure to sectors with direct impacts on nature, and have come out with some very interesting findings of high impact sectors of being 21% of their net asset value. And the next example is on the next slide, from Taiwan with eSun Financial Holdings. They applied the LEAP approach, all 4 phases, in an analysis of their direct operations, supply chains, and portfolio, covering 35,000 domestic enterprises. And you can find their assessment in their climate and nature report, which is available on our website under example reports. And they assessed assets in their portfolio for exposure to certain types of ecologically sensitive area, for example, key biodiversity areas, which were found to cover approximately 20% of their total balance. Then we move to the evaluate phase. This is developing an understanding of the material dependencies and impacts on nature. This gives a variety of useful outputs, a relevant list of things, dependencies and impacts. Then as you go through the materiality assessment from an impact materiality lens, it gives you the list of the final list of material issues. And on the next slide, this is just to show the kinds of things that you get through the LEAP approach that bring foundational concepts to life, lists of environmental assets and ecosystem services you might depend on or impact, lists of indicators and metrics for each of the 5 drivers of nature change, and detailed guidance, for example, on state of nature measurement. Go to the next slide. So on the assess phase, this is the 3rd phase, you move to understand the risks and opportunities for your organisation and which ones are material. So this would enable you to identify what should be disclosed by the organisation, for example, under a financial materiality approach under the ISSB. So you identify, measure and prioritise these issues as you work through the assess phase and produce this list of useful outputs. So as I mentioned, we have a variety of methods for risk assessment. They're in Annex 4 of the LEAP approach, particularly useful for financial institutions moving from heat mapping, asset tagging, all the way through to scenario analysis, so getting increasingly detailed. And finally, the prepare phase. This is where organisations prepare to respond, which may include target setting, embedding into strategy and into risk management and governance, and then potentially to disclosure aligned with the TNFD's recommendations. So on the next slide, let me just complete. I hope that was a useful whistle-stop tour of the TNFD and the LEAP approach. We're now in our 2nd phase of work, as Tony emphasised, moving from what we did in the 1st phase here in yellow with the recommendations and guidance through to a focus on encouraging and enabling adoption. So addressing barriers and gaps that Tony mentioned, capacity building and data. And we also have ongoing development of further guidance on key topics, which includes nature transition planning, risk assessment, state of nature metrics, and sector guidance. And we're delighted to be working on a 2nd set of pilot tests, including some here in Hong Kong to inform this work. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Jenny.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. I think we're all now very well prepped and excited to hear from the panel of early adopters that we have. And we're very delighted to welcome Merlin Lau, who is the Head of Policy and Research from BEC, who will be moderating this panel. We'll also have Audrey Underhill, Business for Nature specialist at ADM Capital Foundation, Patrick Ho, as we had heard earlier, who was one of the pioneers for Hong Kong in terms of TNFD disclosures, and then also Carol Chi, who is a Group Senior Manager for Sustainability from Vitasoy. So with that, let me pass the floor to Merlin.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Emily. And welcome again, my fellow panelists. As Jenny introduced, I think there are commonality among our panelists here, and they are all TNFD adopters among the Hong Kong context. And there's another difference is they all come from different sectors. So we have property development, beverage industry, and financial institutions. So we are trying to see how actually LEAP can be applied into different segments of the industry. So today, I mean, in the next 30-35 minutes, we are trying to drill in maybe 3 main direction questions. One is like why? So why are these companies or institutions like doing TNFD? And secondly, for the LEAP approach, I mean, Emily already gave us sort of a light touch understanding. I don't think, I mean, we can discuss all the LEAP forward steps like in 30 minutes, but in our pre-panel call that each of our panelists in their specific industry, there are some aspects they can highlight more to enlighten our audience here. And finally, we will also see like, okay, after doing TNFD, what's next for these like institutions and companies. So without further ado, I think like I would really already jump into the first question is asking about the why question, the business case of doing nature-related financial disclosure. Maybe I can start with Carol. I think that may be easiest for audience to understand like, what motivate your organization to adopt the TNFD framework. Like what is the opportunity that comes like and that makes you to start? Was it because of like to adjust risk management, whether your board requires you to do, or other strategic opportunities? And then after Carol, maybe then Patrick and Audrey, you can supplement further on your reason doing. So, Carol.
Thanks, Merlin, for the questions. Vitasoy is a plant-based beverages plant-based food and beverages company based in Hong Kong. We also have manufacturing sites in mainland China, Australia, Philippines, and Singapore. Back in 2021, we were invited to join the TNFD forum for commenting the first draft of the guidelines before the formal guidelines was launched. As a food and beverages company, our biggest dependency on nature is in our supply chain, especially the farms where we source our raw materials from. We start looking at the nature-related risks before TNFD actually, because our Australia business already encountered impact through flood and drought. So the business case is very clear. Adopting TNFD actually helped us to review the whole nature-related risks and opportunities in a more holistic manner, not just operation, but also upstream and downstream. Because we need to understand what sort of nature-related risks and opportunities we are facing, what magnitude and how much mitigations we need to proactively take. So I will just share some desktop sharing from beverages industry. So we'll let Patrick and Audrey to share from other sectors as well.
Okay, thank you, Carol. And to add on her point, for a real estate developer like Swire Properties, the business case is very clear. Through the land conversion for building development and the building's contribution to climate change on both embodied carbon and operational emissions, we are actually a significant contributor to nature degradation. And the impacts on building environment system actually extend far beyond where the buildings operate. In our case, a lot of buildings are in highly urbanized area in the city center. But with the globalization of construction supply chain means that the nature impacts actually associated with the building could occur thousands of miles away from where the materials are extracted, processed, for example, steel and concrete. And this so-called embodied nature impact, for the concept of climate, within the fabric of the buildings, from material extraction, mining, and manufacturing, and the impact could more significant than the on-site direct impacts of nature resulting from site clearance, construction, and operation of the building. A lot of literature suggests that 95% of the construction sector impact on nature is actually associated with upstream to supply chain activity, compared to just 5% of the impacts occurring at the direct impact of the building operations. So as Swire Properties, nature and biodiversity is a core focus of our Sustainable Development 2030 strategy. Nature has long been identified as an emerging risk in the past and now already integrated into our corporate risk register. We also recognize that deteriorating natural laws, nature laws, poses transition risk from ensuring the stability of building materials or expose ourselves to higher pricing volatility of these materials, which adversely affect the construction cost, and delay in response to growing market demand for nature-inclusive building design in our properties may also have negative financial impact on the company. So, but on the flip side, there are opportunities presented to us from introducing nature-inclusive designs, nature-based solutions, and promoting circularity in our building construction and operation process. We've been taking concrete steps to ensure projects have a minimal impact on nature and biodiversity. This not only help us manage these emerging risks, but also give us a competitive advantage as biophilic design, building design is gaining traction from what we have observed, and our performance to address nature-related risks and opportunities are increasingly assessed by many of our investors and ESG analysts, and also our commercial tenants and residents. And adopting nature-based solutions such as open greenery space also help us enhance climate resilience against extreme weather events like heat stress and flooding events induced by extreme rainfall events that become more frequent here in Hong Kong and also globally. And the COVID pandemic has also underscored the importance of well-being everywhere in the world and demand for open green space and good air quality. And our tenants actually recognize that importance of the accessibility to more nature, and features like green roofs, gardens, and urban farms are now highly desirable. And this trend has the potential to increase property value over time, further and emphasizing the benefits of integrating nature into our developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Merlin, and thank you to HKGFA for convening us. So ADM Capital Foundation supported on the TNFD report for ADM Capital, which is a private credit provider. So for us as the financial institution perspective, which is a little bit different, we were looking at it through two lenses. One is cultural, which is that ADM Capital has had about a 20-year history of prioritizing sustainability principles. It was in 2006 that we put out our first ESG statement, and also founded the ADM Capital Foundation, which is an NGO dedicated to climate change and nature-based issues in Asia, but specifically in Hong Kong. So that's really been part of the company's DNA for quite some time. On the operational front, actually very similar to Patrick, it's about risks and opportunities. If we lend money to a company and then the impacts and dependencies that that company has mean that they're unable to repay that loan, that's very immediately material to us. So it's a very tangible thing, that this is a risk like any other risk that has to be considered when we're looking at making an investment and then also seeing that investment through to the end. And on the flip side, obviously, there are opportunities. We don't want to see this just as a reason to not do things, but rather to understand where the opportunities are in nature for a financial institution. You know, can we fund nature-based solutions? Can we fund positive things, as well as focusing on not doing harm?
Thank you. So I think it runs a little bit off the script. I believe like we already touched upon the lip, but let me, because we have different audience trying to understand the whole process, right? And Emily already mentioned in the lip we have locate and evaluate. Maybe I want to pick up a little bit further to you, Audrey, because we see financial institutions seeing nature dependency and key impacts. So just now you see maybe we look for opportunities to invest. So how do you see this nature dependency and key impacts in your assessment of the TNFD reporting?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our inaugural TNFD report, we looked mostly at L and E, a little bit less at A and P at the portfolio level, although we do assess all four at a project level. So what we did for the first year, it's really different for a financial institution than for a corporate, because we're not looking at our own operations. You know, if we just looked at what ADM Capital does, we have a couple offices in towers in major cities. There's not really anything material there. So what we're looking at instead is the impacts that our borrowers have, because when we fund these projects, then that's indirectly, well, the projects directly impact, and then that indirectly impacts us as well. So we have to look at a wider spread of companies than a corporate that's doing this for their own purposes, which means that you have to be very dedicated in your scoping, because you can't realistically, look at upstream, downstream, scenario analysis, everything for every single company that you've invested in. So we relied heavily on Encore for this first stage to find the impacts and dependencies for the sectors that we invest in. So in the first year is less about looking at those specific companies, but rather we have companies in, ABC industries. And then Encore is a tool that can tell us for the average company in, for instance, the real estate industry, these are the impacts and dependencies that will be the most material. This is actually similar to what Emily showed at the beginning as a heat mapping on a sectoral basis. So when we looked at our AUM by industry for impacts and dependencies, we found that 57% of our AUM are in industries that are highly or very highly dependent on at least one ecosystem service. I mean, realistically, 100% are, because if we lose ecosystem services, then nothing functions. But these are what Encore had determined are either highly dependent or very highly dependent. And this is because we have heavy exposure to the real estate development, agricultural products, and air freight and logistics industries, which I think it's pretty obvious how those would be very highly dependent on ecosystem services, particularly agricultural products. And 82%, so even more, were in industries with high or very high impacts on key drivers of biodiversity loss. And that's the same three industries, which I think are pretty well known as, having pretty high impacts and dependencies. So what we learned from this is that when we do our next TNFD report, or as we do more nature-based assessments, those are the industries that we need to look at more. So it's almost like a scoping exercise as well as a disclosure, that now we know what to focus in on. And also when we're looking at new investments, we know that those are the industries that are going to be like require some more management on those fronts.
Thank you. Audrey, as you said, like it's for you, financial institution is more like helping to do the scoping exercise. So you focus more on R&D, and you also touch upon, for instance, agriculture is a major like impacted areas. So with that, I think I want to pass that to Carol, like because you're specifically working on the ground, right? So within the LEAP approach, how you take it through, like does L&E also help you do a bit of scoping first, or actually focus more on the assess part? And I think in our pre-call you touch upon, you really try to tap into a lot of the risk when you do the assessment. And you also mentioned, I think previously in our discussion, what kind of tools can support, right? Audrey mentioned on call, so maybe you can elaborate a little bit on your perspective of taking it forward.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can start off with the locate and evaluate exercise first. Same as Emily, we make use of Anchor to identify the material aspect within our business, not only our operation, but also our upstream agricultural business and also downstream activities. And then this year, we selected our soil supplier to conduct a pilot, to conduct a more deep dive study and analysis on crop yield impact. Because the study involved quite a lot of technical expertise, so we partner with an external consultancy, ERM, to do so. We make use of, for example, water assessment on from water jug. We check against the biosensitivity area of our suppliers to make sure to ensure that is the deforestation impact checking. In terms of our own operation, we do have a dependency mainly on water, but when we prioritize, we decided to go straight to our supply chain because this is the most material spot along our business. We deep dive into the areas that we believe the most material, in particular the farms where we source our raw material. This is very complex because it involves information that may not be easily accessible. As mentioned, the most material spot is nature-related crop yield dependency. So we encounter supplier sourcing risk beforehand, such as flood and drought beforehand in Australia. So we deep dive into the crop yield impact related to our supplier. When it comes to assess and prepare, we find that the process of risk and opportunity identification, not only physical, but also transitional one, plus the mapping of relevant metrics and targets very helpful because it allows us to assess what we have already in place and then what are the room for improvement and incorporate into our business decision process. We would like to mention regulatory risk is a key component to signal to the right directions. Taking EU deforestation regulations as an example, we anticipate that the regulations will force company and suppliers to collaborate, and traceability becomes mandatory because that is what the regulation is asking for. In Vitasoy, we have already developed commitment on water reduction target, zero deforestation, non-GMO, zero manufacturing waste to landfill, etc. We also have sustainable farming guidelines which apply to our contract farms in different areas. We also mitigate some of the risks through diversification of our suppliers and local sourcing. Having said that, still there are room for improvement, such as continuously enhance our traceability, enhancement on our sustainable farming guidelines on climate resilience, etc. I think that's we touched on briefly about the LEAP process just now. Perhaps I can pass Patrick to share your experience, perhaps as well.
All right, thank you, Carol. You have covered a lot. Well, in my situation, I guess it's quite similar. We actually follow the TNFD recommendations. That's so useful on the LEAP process. For locate phase, we have actually conducted global portfolio screening and our properties, Hong Kong, Chinese mainland, and the USA using a very long list of international and local database and tools. For example, like Resolve, WWF TNC, Aqueduct, Global Biodiversity Information Facility, the UN, Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center, and also in Hong Kong, Hong Kong Biodiversity Information Hub is particularly useful for all these tools actually help us to assess the current integrity and the resilience of these area and also access proximity to critical habitats. So we identified there are four important metrics that we have help us to do the measurement. One of them is to on the whether there is existence of any threatened species, and also the species richness in our portfolio and in the adjacent in the vicinity, for example, 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers of all of our properties, and also the biodiversity integrity of these sites. And so we come up with a metric to measure these different sort of data to help us to identify risks, to identify potential sites that is of higher biodiversity integrity importance. And from our results, most of the sites are not with high integrity importance, but there are sites that is having a sort of low to moderate integrity importance, and that actually help us to identify ways to come up with plans to try to sort of improve our management of the properties. For some of the sites that is under development, that is also under assessment. In one of the sites in China, in the city of Sanya in Hainan province, where we have a building, a Taikoo Li Sanya over there. That development is on a brown site, but in the whole holistic, look at the broader context is in a more rural setting comparing to Hong Kong. And the LEAP process actually helped us to identify there is indeed a nature reserve that is around 20 kilometers away from a site, right? So it's not direct impact that we're inserting, but we're thinking about, could we actually start to think about the landscape design of this Sanya development to try to introduce greenery that would create a better linkage with the local habitats and plant species that we can actually add into our landscape plan that will be more bringing ecological benefits to the local flora and fauna. And this is indeed a plan that is undergoing, that we have make use of the data to help us inform the building design and the landscape design of our properties with hope to promote urban biodiversity and also bring impact to the local biodiversity at the site.
Thank you. I actually want to pick up on, because we talk about risk, we talk about the process like doing locating and evaluating. I want to touch upon like briefly on like practical opportunities. Like now you do we touch upon slightly, but maybe more like practically how you realize some of the benefits in your working areas. So that can help enlighten our audience. Patrick, you want to pick up first?
Sure. Thank you, Merlin. For audience that are not familiar with Hong Kong, maybe I can talk a little bit more about this project that we do in Hong Kong, in Taikoo Place, Quarry Bay. That is a big business district. That's why property is headquartered at. And since 2016, we initiate a redevelopment project here, demolishing a few old industrial buildings and introducing 2 Grade A green buildings, office buildings, high-rise green buildings. But that redevelopment project actually provide us an opportunity to create a new green open space within Taikoo Place. Now we call it Taikoo Square. It's a landscape area, right? There's so many typical greenery landscape projects in Hong Kong, and I think globally. But this project is actually where we have been able to introduce a lot of concepts that is promoting urban biodiversity in the whole design, and we're seeing a lot of benefits of doing that. And in our master planning since 2016, we have actually set a mind and strategy for this green space around 70,000 square feet greenery space to be promoting urban biodiversity. So it's not only the size matter, but equally important is how we could support that through the design. So we have actually conducted a very comprehensive urban biodiversity study and assessments with Hong Kong U, and this study helped us to establish sort of the baseline biodiversity baseline, the status, for example, species diversity in the area. And the findings also help us to work with our landscape designer to actually resulting in a design that incorporates some local native species we call feng shui woodland species in Hong Kong. They are a very special part of Hong Kong's rich ecological heritage. If you come to some, new territories or villages, there's usually a big feng shui woodland behind the villages that they're usually the hotspots of biodiversity. They are home to a variety of wildlife, including birds and mammals. They provide essential ecosystem services. For example, climate, preserving water, climate regulation, and providing the food resources for villages at the same time. So we borrow that concept to bring some of those species that you rarely find in local gardens and public parks. So this is one part. And also in terms of the design, we have now over 260 native exotic plant species. That is comparing to typical greenery or park. This is extremely high, and a lot of these species are selected based on their ecological value. So not just on aesthetics or easy to maintenance. All right, they are particularly selected because they can provide a particular food sources for a particular butterfly or bees or birds, and that's the reason that why we select that, and that's actually informed by the biodiversity survey. And also, the way that we build that, design that registration structure, we are also embracing a planting approach that is not very typical and that echoes nature's biodiversity. Instead of very neat and orderly row of single species, our planters are a mix of different plants in a more organic structure. So the plants and animals, actually the birds are, they would, feel like more easy, and they feel like the micro habitat is more three-dimensional, and they will feel more easier to, actually reside and, spend the time in the woodland areas. So at the end, what we plan to achieve is that approximately 30% of the whole Taikoo Place is now covered by this landscape area, and also it's building a more continuous tree canopy that acts as a green corridor that facilitates the movement of birds, butterflies between Taikoo Place. And also there are nearby existing habitats from the government. For example, the country park is just, a few kilometers away. And also there are public parks in the vicinity of Taikoo Place. So we are building this approach to connect the existing benefits, existing habitats. So addressing in a way, one way or another, the habitat fragmentation that is a very common problem of a lot of the city. And this investment in green space also, is supported by our green bonds and actually help us to raise our climate adaptation ability. As the green space help mitigate flooding impact and also improve the microclimate. We from a CFD modeling that has helped us create an additional 27% of thermally comfortable area in Taikoo Place. So it's very huge, important piece for Hong Kong highly urbanized area.
Yeah, Patrick, a very quick answer. Do you see direct impact on the tenancy, like the program?
Yeah, we hope to, right? But of course, tenants to see that is there as a package of things, right? It's not just nature and biodiversity that matters. It's also the green buildings, energy efficiency, and the ESG provisions that we can provide to them. So from our study, we try to quantify that impact, right? It's around in 2023, in that year, it's about 421 million Hong Kong dollars that, we see from the, additional sort of premium that tenants are willing to pay for our certified green building office. And I think nature and accessibility to green space is also part of it. Yeah.
Carol, I think the audience already asked a quite similar question, like, does it make it more competitive? Like when you do this, like what actual tangible opportunities that you see that is beneficial to your operations?
I think for us, we start off with more on risk management, a prudent approach. But when it comes to, it's in a flip side on opportunities. We have a better supplier engagement in your upstream supply chain. That will help you on stability on your business. We also, apart from upstream supply chain stability, actually we did I map out some of the downstream opportunities, such as a plant-based related diet portfolio or a nature-related portfolio as well. But after all, if you ask me the most material spot or impact, I was still referring to our stability on our supply chain, the opportunity about our sustainable farming program, how to engage our contract farm, helping them on better management on the farm with cost efficiency and productivity. We will see that also as an opportunity, but may not be directly related to our revenue, but more on our upstream supplier engagement.
Thank you. I will ask last question before we go into a lot of these Q&A by the audience. Maybe turn it to Audrey, and others can supplement on that. So we talk about TNFD. When we do TNFD, what are the actual challenges and learning that you got that you want to share with the audience? So Audrey.
Yeah. Data availability is the first thing that comes to mind. I think that every company, Carol is nodding, every company faces the same thing, which is that you can have every intention of looking at these things, but when it comes down to what are the metrics that we're using, what actually is the state of nature there now? What was it before? What can it be? We haven't coalesced yet around an approach for measuring these things. And the data is not always available, particularly in ADM's context. Our borrowers are small and medium-sized enterprises. And so they probably don't have a sustainability team. They probably don't know what their impacts are. And so we can, because we have certain leverage, because we're funding them, we can ask for data. We can help them to start to collect that data. But if, as of right now, it doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. So for us, it's been a lot of engagement and education of the borrowers. And we've used software tools and some other things to help them start to collect this data. But we're really going to see the fruits of that, next year and the year after, once that starts coming in, because there is kind of a roll-up period for that. So really, for us right now, it's just by getting that process started so that next time we report, we have some initial data, and the next time we report after that, then we can start looking at the progression of the data over time. For other financial institutions that may be investing in listed companies or companies that are a little bit bigger or have a sustainability aspect to them already, then there may be a little bit more data, and there are resources for larger companies. But for our borrowers, it's just not, there's not a lot available right now.
Thank you. Carol, Patrick, anything you wanted to add on the many, many challenges that you see?
I agree more from, as Audrey, yes, same. We encounter the data availability and information availability challenges. For us, our contract farms are easier because we have direct access, but when it comes to trader, it still remains challenges. So we continuously work with our procurement team to engage our supplier. We see that is an ongoing process to enhance along the way. It's a long term.
Yeah. Oh, Patrick, you're unmuted. You want to add something on that?
Just echoing that, I think the supply chain piece is something we are still working on, to be honest. And also, we have been working with, of course, a lot of things on carbon to start with, on sourcing low carbon materials for concrete and steel. But on the topic of nature is much broader. So we need to, at least at this stage, we are already doing some deep dive in part of some of the supply chain down to the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers for concrete and steel. And that's a very complicated process because that's actually the whole, concrete and steel manufacturing product, the production stage through the mining activities, through the manufacturing activities. That's already cover a great geographical span of a lot of sites that we need to do very, deep dive on the local interface with nature. I think that would need a lot of, further, sort of analysis to really help us to get at least the data for us to have the clear picture. But that doesn't, deter us from taking more measures in terms of, overall green procurement strategy, because we are already, due to the climate change requirement, we are already, introducing the requirement of, for example, we're setting out, low carbon specifications for some of the major construction materials that we source. And a lot of buildings now are already sourcing some 100% of low carbon concrete from some of the developments in Hong Kong. I guess this is also helping nature, but in terms of the nature impact, that would need a lot more works and research and analysis and contribution from the industry in general to help with that.
Thank you. I see Emily and TJ are busy answering some of these questions already. I would like to actually tag on some of these questions, either not answer or maybe further elaborated. So maybe Emily, TJ, please feel free to also join this part of the discussions. I think the first question actually Emily already answered. One of the attendees asked about the relationship between TNFD and the climate change management, TCFD, IFRS. I wonder, maybe Emily, you want to elaborate verbally again on this, and then maybe our panelists, in your daily operation, or you do a lot of disclosure, right? How do you actually integrate the two when you do practically day-to-day work on this?
Thank you very much. And yes, the overall approach for TNFD to nature, of course, conceptually includes climate change, because it's one of the 5 drivers of nature loss. And then, of course, land use change like deforestation is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. And on the positive side, nature provides many services, some specifically around global as well as local climate regulation. So we know conceptually these are connected, and it's interesting to see that some organizations are using integrated climate nature scenarios and doing integrated reporting, and we expect that to be the trajectory over time, because of course they're very interlinked. But just on a more detailed basis, for the specifics of metrics and recommendations for disclosure for greenhouse gas emissions, that is of course going to TCFD. They have detailed guidance for that. That's now folded into the ISSB S2 standard. So we always reference back to TCFD for that detail and to S2. But conceptually, of course, we recognize the important interlinkages between thinking about climate change, both from a mitigation perspective, but of course also for adaptation with nature.
You, panelists, you want to add on this question? Practically, how you do this in your daily job?
Perhaps I can supplement from a soil perspective. We're actually combining TCFD and TNFD statement and integrate them as part of our sustainability reporting, putting it as a standalone section. So we found this integrate quite well, because both TCFD and TNFD share the similar disclosure framework, governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So we found that this approach provides a clear framework for investors to easily access and looking for the information that they are interested in. So feel free to take a look at the standalone section in our sustainability report as well.
We did the same thing, actually. We published one sustainability report, and the second report, there was a combined TNFD and TCFD. And actually for next year, we're considering potentially making it one report, so a sustainability report, but then with a large nature section, which then responds to the disclosures of the TNFD. So there are economies of scale to be had if you're doing multiple reports.
Yeah, same for Thrive Properties. And on the 8th of April, very soon, a few days from now, we will be issuing our Sustainability Report 2024. And it's also the first time we start to integrate the TNFD recommendations into the ISSB S2 and Hong Kong Stock Exchange ESG code. And so we see the value of doing that, because the governance approach, the strategy, that, as Emily mentioned, right, is so interlinked, and it's and also help, I think, readers, our investors, and our all stakeholders to understand the holistic approach that we take on both issues. I guess this is a very strategic move, and also a very efficient, in terms of the in terms of report production preparation. I think is the way to go.
The other questions I want to pick up from the chat is we briefly touch upon that, like it's asking like, are you already working on strategy to reduce your impacts on nature alongside your supply chain, or just in your operation? I think for the case of Vitasoy, it's very straightforward, like the supply chain, right? But does anyone want to further elaborate on this? On the like a strategy, like in Patrick, I think you also touched upon a little bit on that. Are you, particular for nature, you're looking into the operation, your building portfolio, or actually in your sourcing, you consider some of the nature aspect?
Yes, we do. And for building, of course, we have biodiversity integration guidelines that applies to all of our buildings, Hong Kong and China, taking into local biodiversity context, with very specific recommendations on the building design, creation of microhabitats, and the connection of green space with the adjacent, biodiversity habitat that we are now, being implemented already in a lot of the new development in China. And also some existing portfolio, we are also doing the same thing to reveal the current landscape, to incorporate some new design to actually promote urban biodiversity. So for supply chain, it's a much broader question, not just nature. We are doing a lot on engaging our supply chain to understand the whole ESG exposure and risk opportunities. And on climate, on human rights, on a lot of things, right? Nature and biodiversity interface is something new to them. So we do see the opportunity to work with our suppliers to help them with to adopt maybe LEAP and also the TNFD, some of for the SMEs, in particular the SME guidance from TNFD that will be helpful for these smaller companies to start to think about a few practices that they can adopt in terms of managing their own sort of water impact, for example, water consumption, waste, and if they're operating in some sensitive areas that biodiversity, how could they minimize those impacts? I guess these are areas that we are incorporating into our engagement with our suppliers, and also in our green procurement guidelines over the time. So this is a lot of things that we're learning by doing.
Okay. A question maybe back to TJ and Emily. I think the question is asking about TNFD adoption at the international level. I mean, like G7 countries. So maybe I rephrase that question next. Like, what is the adoption plan for TNFD in alignment with some of the other international framework, in order to try to address these audience questions?
TJ, would you like to start, or shall I?
No, I think probably you should go for it.
Thank you. Please complement with more from the Asia region. Yes, so for adoption of TNFD, we learn from the experience of TCFD of 3 pathways that are already well underway. The first is around voluntary adoption, and the examples are very powerful from this webinar in Hong Kong of voluntary adoption from the interests of the organization for their own improving their strategy, their resilience of their strategy. The second pathway is through to international standards. So we have been working actively with both the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is setting the sustainability reporting global baseline, as well as with the Global Reporting Initiative, which is focused on impact reporting from the very beginning of TNFD's work. So they've been knowledge partners, as I mentioned, from one of those 20 knowledge partners is ISSB and also GRI, as well as CDP, who've developed the disclosure platform. And they are now incorporating TNFD's recommendations into their thinking. GRI very specifically updated GRI 101 based on TNFD's recommendations. And the ISSB now has a specific research project on biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services, which is exploring and learning from the TNFD, and Tony and I had the pleasure of briefing that board back in February. So route 1, voluntary adoption, route 2, through to international standards, and then route 3, potentially into regulation. And we always emphasize that we are a voluntary market-led initiative. But of course, there was the precedent with TCFD as it was folded recommendations into the global standards like S2, for it then to be incorporated into regulation. And there is one jurisdiction in Europe which moved very quickly to alongside our framework development. So it's already folded into the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, already incorporate all 14 of our recommendations. So we expect that to evolve over time. And we're excited. Maybe I'll hand briefly to TJ on the uptake in Asia.
So thank you, Emily. Maybe I can also give an update on what's happening in Asia right now. And what is the adoption status for TNFD in Asia? So in Asia specifically, we are right now engaged with 1,000 plus companies who are actively engaged with TNFD forum, who also engaged with all the content we come out with, and directly or indirectly working with LEAP and trying to cover LEAP within their organization. We have about over 200 companies who have adopted the TNFD framework and officially committed to reporting in 2024, 2025, or 2026. And just some key industries, if you want to talk about, we have adopters ranging from infra, technology, agriculture, transportation, mining, renewable energy, healthcare, consumer good, aviation. So just to give you some example, Qantas Airlines is one of our adopters in Asia. ANA Airlines. We have Swire Properties. We have CDL in Singapore. We have Tata Steel in India. We have JSW Steel in India as well. So our adopters range from diverse industries. In financial institutions, we have banks, asset managers, insurers, investment firms who are also integrating nature-related risk into their strategies. And just from an overall perspective, I think this rapid adoption shows that nature-related disclosures are becoming a business priority with investors, regulators, and lenders increasingly asking companies their nature-related risk and impacts. And especially those who start now will really be better positioned for the changing regulatory and market landscape which we're already seeing is happening. And on that note, I would also like to mention that we have also launched our adoption campaign for this year. And we will be announcing the next set of adopters at COP this year in Brazil. So we welcome any company who would like to be an official TNFD adopter and act as a leader in this space. And promote yourselves to international investors, because one of the questions also was how do you gain edge by being an adopter? So I think more than the edge, I think is really to showcase yourself as being a leader in this space, gain trust with your consumers, gain trust with your clients, and investor confidence is really what is going to give you some fortune in the long term. So just a scope on APAC. Thank you.
Thank you. I am aware of the time, and usually more questions come in the end. I don't think we are going to address them right now, but we can try to follow that afterwards. Before I hand it to TJ again for closing, I actually want to put it back to our panelists, just maybe very short. What's next for your organization's nature-related priorities? Now you are on board of TNFD, and a short piece of recommendation for our fellow companies or organizations that may want to embark the journey. Anyone?
Perhaps I can start off first. We are straightforward. We will continue to enhance our traceability and our sustainable farming program, because it is also preparing part of the EU deforestation regulatory context. The advice for other companies is we will suggest you to start small, using, for example, Anchor to map out the key aspect of your whole value chain. Then you map out what you have already in place and make use of it as a gap analysis and find out the room for improvement along and put it into your strategy and continuous enhance along the way. This is just one simple advice from us.
Thank you, Patrick.
I think it's to engage your senior management and the board about the financial materiality, about nature. I guess it's one of the very important tasks to start doing on it if you haven't done so.
So we have internal and external plans for this year, which is to use the TNFD report from last year to understand where the gaps are. So since we published, we've been engaging with the borrowers specifically on the questions that we weren't able to answer in the first round. So sort of using our own first experience as learning to make this year's report better, and also help the borrowers understand what it is that we're going to ask from them. I would reiterate what Carol said, that it's not all or nothing. You can start small. You don't have to have a very comprehensive answer to every single question, have all of your metrics, have all of your targets in order to publish a TNFD report or to become an adopter. I would also point out that now that we have sort of a first tranche of TNFD reports, you can leverage those as well. I've looked at the reports of other financial institutions and thought that's a great idea. You know, we should do that. We should approach it in that way. So there's no reason not to learn from each other, given that we're all trying to do the same thing here.
Thank you everyone. I hope they are good advices for our fellow audience. So TJ, I want to pass the floor to you for closing.
Yeah, thank you, Merlin. First of all, great discussion. I just want to say that on behalf of TNFD, thank you to everyone who joined us today for the launch of the TNFD LEAP approach in Mandarin. A special thanks to our partners, Hong Kong Green Finance Association and Business Environment Council, for your continued support and collaboration. The insights shared today underscore really one important truth. Nature is now a core consideration for both businesses and finance. It directly affects performance, resilience, and long-term value. So just as the next steps, how do we go from here? So I think the first is really, let's start your LEAP journey. If you haven't already, begin applying the LEAP approach to assess your nature-related risk and opportunities. Even a partial assessment is a first strong step. Second is really engage with us. TNFD is here to support you. Reach out to us for case studies, learning opportunities, explore our new learning portal, which Tony mentioned, and our knowledge tools, which is available on our website, that can really help you through your nature-related disclosures. Third is really consider formal adoption. We have over 500 organizations who have globally adopted, who have signaled their leadership by becoming TNFD adopters. You'll be part of the growing movement and how they're shaping to create value and protect nature. And last but not the least, collaborate locally with your partners, Hong Kong Green Finance Association and Business Environment Council, to share your experiences, build internal capacity, and align with the evolving regulatory and investor expectations. I would just like to close with one last line. As we move forward, this isn't just about ticking a box. It's about shifting how we think, how we value nature in the decision we make every day. It won't happen overnight, but every small step counts. And really, we're not doing this alone. We are part of a growing community. We have over 1,700 organizations who are part of this community, who are working toward a future that's not only sustainable, but more resilient and fair. And thank you for being part of this discussion today. Over to you, Jenny.
Great. Thank you, all our speakers today. I am encouraged, I am inspired, and I hope everybody else on the call is. If you're interested in joining the consultation group in Hong Kong, please do reach out to the Secretariat, and we will basically connect in with you. And before we close this event, please do not forget to complete the survey at the end if you would like to claim your CPT points. Follow us, HKGFA, BEC, on LinkedIn. And then also, again, please join in with the movement. And we look forward to working with you.